As we'll begin to see, this phrase of embedding schedules or embedding matrix or embedding matrices evolves over time. Not only the term, but how the matrix itself or schedule looks. This is one of the earliest examples of an embedding schedule that was really just trying to identify teachable moments. And so many times when people look at embedding schedules, they're either for individual children or they're for groups of children. So they're either used by an itinerant when they visit a single child, or they can be created for that child in a group context. They can also be used in homes. They can be used in center-based programs where preschool special ed or preschool teachers are delivering the instruction. It doesn't really matter. The idea is that we always think about what's happening in the intersect and what message are we trying to tell people. So in this first example, people would just put X's where there was a teachable moment. And while this is pretty basic, it's not a bad idea of something worth doing, because many times as consultants, as visiting teachers, as related service personnel who might be coaching a family member, a Head Start teacher, a preschool provider on how to deliver instruction, there may not be agreement on when the best time it is to teach something. So I, as a consultant, may think it's a fabulous time to do this during snack time, but from the other adults that have to deliver the instruction, they may find this is not a good time. So just even mapping out when is a good time versus not a good time can be a worthwhile conversation. This, again, is an embedding schedule that's coming from the activity-based intervention text, and it's for an individual child where they've got, let's say, an IFSP goal or an IEP goal, and we're going to look at the family routine. This could be the family's routine, it could be the Head Start routine, it could be the child care routine. Again, these could be easily adapted. As we think about how these evolved, again, one variation of the schedules came from thinking about groups of children versus just an individual child. Even though as an itinerant or as a consultant, we may really be thinking about a single child, the environment, when there's a group setting, they may need to think of multiple children at once and not just an individual child. And this will become clearer as we talk about tiered instruction, that every child is a triangle, every child has needs, every child might need some planning in an embedding schedule or matrix. This will make sense as well. So in this example, we have, let's say, 4 children, maybe all of whom are receiving some targeted instruction at tier 2. And then we start to think about what are their individual goals, or even what are some of their skills that may overlap beyond just where they're struggling, but what are some common outcomes, what are some individualized outcomes. As the embedding schedules evolved throughout time in our work, people stopped using X's and people started to concentrate on the what was the outcome, what are children learning. So in this example, there's a list of children down the side, a list of areas of development across the top, and we're thinking about what is Benjamin learning? What literacy skills, what social skills, what mathematics skills, what adaptive skills. For Tara, she may also have literacy skills, social skills, and a communication skill. These can again be common outcomes for all children or really individualized outcomes. Keeping in mind that if we have too many individualized outcomes that require really intensive instruction, sure, these are all teachable moments, but how during a literacy activity would a teacher be able to address all of these outcomes at once? If they can, it's fabulous, it's perfect, it's embedded correctly. But if it just gives too many individualized skills to do in a single activity, it can become overwhelming. That said, if we embed literacy across activities, this then becomes not a mass trial, but a distributed trial, not only by children, but by outcome. So as we've evolved in the embedding schedules and gone from just placing X's where there's a teachable moment to identifying what outcome we're actually working on to increase our intentionality, we've also begun to think about standards and common outcomes for all children, as well as individualized outcomes that may be on a child's IEP or IFSP, or may just be an individualized outcome given that child's unique needs. So here's an example of where we've taken different activities, arrival and free play, morning circle and planning time and centers, and really identified the common outcomes that all children should be learning in this activity, and then using the initials of children, sharing what individual children are learning within the context of the activity. This also reminds us that we're not pulling children out, we're not pulling them over, we're not pulling them aside. Even when we as an itinerant or a consultant may make a visit to a home or to a classroom, to a center-based activity, the goal is not for us to interact one-on-one with the child, but rather to figure out how to address that child's needs within the context of the ongoing activity so that they're exposed to the broad outcome, but also receive intentional instruction on their individualized outcome. This notion of tiered instruction, this notion that there are common outcomes, targeted outcomes, and individualized outcomes, where we address the needs of all children, some children, individualized children, can also be done in a single activity. So it's a variation of an activity matrix or an embedding schedule, but we're really unpacking this activity, the old lady that swallowed a fly, or this whole felt board activity that we may do, and we're going to be very thoughtful about which standards or common outcomes are addressed for all children, and then what are some individual skills that can be addressed as well. And this may be just a brainstorming tool where we haven't really identified who has individual needs, but rather thinking, okay, if I'm teaching these broad outcomes, what might be some foundational prerequisite skills that some children or a few children may need additional support on, so that they're not identified in state standards, but they are things that we know in a blended classroom or a classroom of diverse learners that individual attention may need to be given to these foundational and prerequisite skills. So it's just another evolution, if you will, of how we're thinking about being intentional. Here's an example of sort of this three-way thought again. This comes from the Blended Practices text by my colleagues Jennifer Christian-Brown and Mary Louise Hemeter and myself. This is really, again, thinking about content areas, making sure that we know what we're teaching all children in these content areas or standards, and then how one individual child has either some targeted or individualized skills that need to be addressed. And again, we're thinking about that this child, Alex, is being taught, they're receiving instruction within the context of the ongoing activities that may be addressing state standards. As embedding schedules continue to morph and evolve, you'll see many times now at the intersect, it's far less about what the child outcome is and far more about what the adult will do. And we'll see this as we continue our conversation around intentional instructional sequencers, or what we call power packs, where we're really talking about what will a teacher teach, when will they teach, where will they teach, what materials will they use to teach. That's all lovely, but how will they actually teach the outcome? So no matter what kind of embedding schedule we've created, or activity schedule we've created, or matrix that we've created, does the adult who is interacting with the children truly understand what evidence-based strategy they could use in that moment to teach either a common outcome, a targeted outcome, or an individualized outcome? So in this example, you see that there are several different activities. Again, this could be starting with the home routine and moving into the child care routine, because it's still one child in the context of their daily routine, not our daily routine. The child has some individualized behaviors around initiating and maintaining interaction and expressing wants and needs. So what will the adults do or say or model or prompt for? Will they use visible but unreachable? Will they use self-talk? Will they use modeling and labeling? Will they give choices between things to elicit these skills of initiating and maintaining and expressing wants and needs? And again, in the next part of our conversation around activity schedules, we'll talk a little bit more about how do we pick the how. But in this illustration, you see these bullets are what adults will do. They'll take turns, they'll expand on play, they'll keep a toy out of reach, they will put snack out of reach, they'll wait 5 seconds. They'll give choices. they'll give a command, they will ask a question. So this is really important that we understand that the adults are now being instructed on how to speak with one voice and how to really ensure that the instruction is delivered. So we move from the X's being in the matrix connection, the intersect, to say, oh, it's a teachable moment. Great. Then we move to who's learning what. That's also good. But then we have groups of children, or we have every child as a triangle, meaning every child has common needs, targeted needs, and individual needs. So we had to really think about how do we address those in the same activity or routine. And then we morphed into how do we make sure adults actually deliver that instruction. A variation of any of these matrices or schedules is this notion that we can begin to collect data. You could think of this as fidelity data in terms of whether or not the adult delivered the instruction, as well as child performance data. So this one is really a rating scale, but you can almost imagine it as a matrix where we have children by domain. And so Josh has a fine motor skill, and Josh has a gross motor skill that's being targeted, and a cognitive, and a social communication, and a social. Now again, these don't have to all be IEP goals, and I would encourage them not all to be IEP goals. This would be far too many goals that were individualized for a single child, but there could be embedded across these domains things that are state standards or all children are learning, something that Josh or Erica or Brady are struggling with and need temporary support, and or an individualized outcome, whether or not they're on an IEP. And then we use this common metric of a rating scale of 1, 2, or 3, no attempt with assistance or model, or independent performance, so that in the same activity we can deliver tiered instruction across the whole child, across areas of development, and then actually collect some basic data on how the child's performance was in that activity.